Apparently today is the day of many videos. It started with the daily vlog, followed by the Nikon D6, followed by this video now. I am happy to announce that the Wedding Photography Podcast for Patreon members is back online. There are 41 episodes. If you sign up for Patreon, you get all 41 episodes right now. You also get my pricing video, contract, 100 plus other videos, my presets, live meetings, all kinds of stuff. If you haven't yet signed up, it's definitely worth the money. It's probably the best money you can spend on wedding photography education anywhere on the internet, just sheer number of content volume and the fact that it's being updated every single week. Patreon podcast, as it stands now, is a weekly Q&A, but that's going to evolve a little bit kind of going forward starting today. I'm going to play for you this week's episode, so if you're interested in hearing what it's all about, it's coming up right now. There's going to be no video though, because it's a podcast. It's audio only. Here it is. Hey everyone, welcome to the Patreon podcast. It has been a little while since I've done one of these. I asked in the Patreon Facebook group, if you're not a member over on the Patreon Facebook group, please feel free to join. There's a link it used to be at the top of Patreon, patreon.com/TaylorJackson, but they kind of move things around and I feel like they're always experimenting. So if it's not up there, let me know and I will add the comment, or I'll add the link to your comment below. And I asked there for a couple of questions to get this episode of the podcast started. I have 16 comments and I will begin getting to them all right now. Alan says, would love some more advice on call flow and structure for initial telephone contact with a customer that you're trying to book. So I guess I haven't spoken to this in a little while, but my strategy for in-person meetings as well as phone calls is to come up with just kind of like a strange and memorable time. It adds like a weird sense of scarcity if you select, like, basically if you're going up against another photographer and they're like, hey, I'm available Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every single day, please pick a time. You don't look super in demand, but if you're like, hey, I can do Tuesday at 7:45 p.m. And that seems to get a much better response rate to me. And if I would give people kind of multiple options for times, it was always like, oh, but we're not available till Thursday. Can you do Thursday at 4? And it wasn't even one of the times that I suggested. But I find that by giving them one or just two times that usually people make it work. And that is kind of good for, I guess, my life happiness, that I'm a little bit more in control of my schedule. So moving into the flow of calls, there's no official, I don't think, right or wrong way to do a call. I find that usually the way that I get things started, I'm kind of, I would say, more down to business. Lindsay's kind of on the other end where her meetings and phone calls go for a lot longer than mine. Usually within the first like 2-3 minutes of like, hey, thanks so much for like getting in contact and going through or talking with me on the phone. At that point, I just ask them where they're at in their wedding planning process. And usually that kind of spars them to go into more of a description of just kind of like the timeline. If they don't know what that question means, which does happen sometimes, I just have them walk me through the timeline that they have so far. And usually, at the very least, if they're booking me, they probably have a venue, they probably have a date, and they probably have a ceremony time. And that's usually enough, at least, to just kind of get things moving. And that usually just kind of brings up other questions that they might have when you make them kind of walk through the date. As far as kind of the sales process or the closing process, I feel like this would be another aspect of it that is maybe the most important. I'm very low pressure sales. I will tell them that, like, if they decide that they want to move forward, send me an email. We can do contract and payment all online. I'm not going to force them, like, if you book on the phone, you get 10% off or anything like that. I do want people to make the right decision. And I feel like by doing this, maybe I can't obviously put a statistic on maybe how many leads I've closed by not having kind of a hard end of sales, but I feel like my ideal customer kind of gets along a lot better with that. With also introducing some scarcity things, like the fact you're booking weird times that they know you're so busy that you can only do 7:45 p.m. on Tuesday. I feel like by doing that and then doing soft sales is kind of like a good balance, at least for me. So I just have them email me at the end of it. And usually by that point, they're pretty sold. And typically I would say if they're on FaceTime, they're kind of at the point, they're like, do we tell him now that we're going to book or do we just wait? And usually they just kind of wait until, and then they email me. Usually it's like an hour or two after the call. Beyond that, it's really just kind of getting to walk through the day and talking through my process when it comes to wedding photography, like that I want them to know that most of the day is candid, that 90% of the day is going to be candid. 10% of the day is going to be when I actually have to stand in and do the family formals and actually take control. People tend to like to hear that, or at least my ideal clients really like to hear that. And then just like any of your kind of key points of what sets you apart, to just subtly kind of bring them up, I feel like is definitely a positive thing. If you're doing hybrid video coverage, hybrid photo video coverage, to talk them through that a little bit and explain how it's possible is also helpful, that most people, they just don't understand. So to go in depth a little bit and say like, hey, this is how I do things, this is how I choose moments, gives them a little bit more of the behind the scenes, which usually relaxes them a little bit more. So if you're on a phone call, you can have a list of stuff that you want to hit, or at least stuff that you want to talk about, because for the most part, couples don't really know any questions. Like if you've done your job correctly on your website and you have enough information out there to pretty much make them like ready to book by the first, like, so theoretically, by the time that they actually contact you and set up a meeting, most couples should probably be in the situation that they want to already book with you, that the meeting is just to make sure you guys actually get along on some level. So if you're doing that correctly on your website and in your social content, when you actually get to the meeting, it should just be like, come up with things to further sell yourself, as well as just coming up with things to talk about to fill like 15, 20 minutes. I would say most of my meetings, if I am on the phone for 25 minutes, I feel like that's a long time. I feel like most phone calls are 15 minutes, maybe 15 to 20. And most in-person meetings are a little bit longer because you have to get coffee and there's just kind of more that goes into it. Personally, I prefer phone meetings. I will always push couples to meet on the phone. And I'm going to say I do probably 90% of my meetings on the phone. We're also dealing with, Lindsay kind of brought it up, that when people meet at our studio, it seems like the booking ratio is a little bit lower than when we actually met in coffee shops, that people feel maybe a little bit more pressured, or they feel like we have, I don't know, like overhead to maintain, and that's why we're a little bit more expensive. So if you're on the fence with getting a studio, that might end up actually being a negative in the grand scheme of things for actual booking. But that's to be determined in the future. All right, next question. I've gotten a few inquiries, scheduled a few calls to discuss pricing, but I haven't heard back from the couple. I'm not overpriced, but I can't seem to understand why I'm not getting any follow-ups or bookings. So I think that all kind of comes down to just coming up with a unique way to kind of hook them in. I found for myself that offering free engagement sessions usually got people to jump over the hurdle to at least be like, okay, like this guy's pretty serious. They're so serious, in fact, with their skills, that they're offering kind of like a try before we buy. And that was one thing that I kind of found that pushed my bookings from pretty often getting ghosted to very rarely getting ghosted, and almost never getting ghosted by my ideal couples. That's something that worked for me. But beyond that, it's really about just kind of putting more of yourself out there, I think, on the internet. And like that, everything is just so transparent now that if they connect with somebody else a little bit better, they're probably going to end up going with them, especially if you're comparably priced and skill level as well. So the more you can be out there on the internet, as far as either on video, if you're comfortable with that, or just creating content and teaching couples how to plan an amazing wedding, those are kind of all good things that you can do that aren't going to solve the problem immediately, but they are going to make the problem better over time. All right, Steve says, my question will always be, how does a new wedding photographer book weddings if they've never done a wedding before and has no wedding portfolio? I can't get someone to let me second shoot for free, or shoot a wedding for free for that matter, and I can't afford a wedding wire or the knot. My advice for this is to just start putting your own shoots together, that rather than spending money to advertise on the knot, spend maybe a couple dollars or collaborate with a few different vendors to just create your own portfolio. I've actually seen a lot of success with this with different people in Patreon, that they've reached out to people, and it's almost been a surprise that when they were like reaching out, that people actually wanted to work together. And again, the easiest way like to make that happen is to make it super easy on the other person. So if you've already secured a venue that's cool with you shooting for free, or a restaurant, or really anything, that whatever you're able to get for free is what I would recommend doing. And whatever you can get, whatever space you can shoot in, set a date, and then just start collecting other vendors and kind of piecing things together. And hopefully, if you can find a model, or if you know somebody that has already been married and has a dress, or if you can find somebody that is cool with wearing a wedding dress, and you can talk to a bridal shop and let them know that everything's going to be happening inside, so there's no way that their dress can get dirty, and they can come and be on site if they want. Or even to flip that even further, we've done shoots in the actual bridal shop, and people are pretty cool with us just coming in, setting up a backdrop, and shooting content. One, like, it's content to share with them for their marketing images, and two, it's content that like has really no risk for them at all, that you bring everything in, and now they have environmental images of their gowns and dresses inside their studio or shop, which I feel like are much better marketing images, because most bridal shops specifically all just kind of use the stock images that they're provided with the from the dress manufacturers, and by doing stuff actually in their shop makes it a lot more personal, a lot more them. So that might be a little bit of an in. All right, Duncan asks, hey, Taylor, I'm actually just curious to hear your thoughts on using YouTube as a passive income stream to supplement photography. I've heard good things, but wanted to know if it's worth it in your opinion. I would say that YouTube is the opposite of a passive income stream, that it is probably the hardest place to make money on the internet anywhere, maybe not the absolute hardest, but you really do have to have a lot of great fortune, great collaborations. The algorithm has to like you. Personally speaking, from my experience, my account is so old now. It's like eight or 9 years old now on YouTube. So as you'll see, when I upload new videos, they don't get nearly the reach that somebody that just started a new account does, which is unfortunate and sad that it punishes kind of older creators. But in the early stages, you can kind of rely on that. So if you start a new account and you go really hard, you can generate a pretty good amount of metrics and stats and buzz behind you, but you just have to know that like day one, you kind of have, I don't know what the official window is, but it seems like it's like 6 or 8 months, that you have kind of those 6 or 8 months to really kind of make it. And if you don't, it's going to be a super struggle for you. From my experience, so from 2008, I think when I created my account, maybe 2007, up until probably 2015, I was posting somewhat regularly. I was doing a show called A Photographer In, which is a travel show. We spent a bunch of money to produce it. And at that point, I think I had about 30,000 subscribers, and I was making maybe like $25 a month on ad revenue. Now to share my exact metrics, I will look it up right now. I'm going to say it's like 900 a month for ad revenue. It is, as of this year, or as of this month rather. Past 18 days, I've made $1,100 US, which is great. But for the amount of time and the amount of back content that I've put into that, I would probably ballpark that at around like, maybe I'm making $1 an hour, probably less than $1 an hour. But at the same point, that like this kind of, as you're amassing content into YouTube, if you go with something like photography, which in my opinion is kind of a dying niche for content, if you are into something else that it has more eyeballs on it and more interest in general, like photography would have in 2010, there's a pretty good chance that you can probably create something that's pretty good and actually maybe make passive income. It's important, I think, if you do want to do it professionally, though, is to have something additional to that. So like myself and pretty much any photographer, they have presets to sell or LUTs or whatever it might be. You do have to kind of find that product to be able to sell to somebody. Otherwise, you're not really going to make enough money that... And then when it comes down to it, that $1,100 US that I make, I probably spend at least that on ads, like boosted ads, swipe up ads, everything pointing people to the direction of my content every month. So I would say ad revenue is break even, find your presets or find LUTs or whatever makes sense in the niche that you're going to go into. And there are different niches, obviously, for YouTube content. That photography is kind of, I guess, what we're the most comfortable with. We are super aware of everything that happens in the YouTube space for it. But if you get into a place where there's just no market for any extra sales, it becomes very difficult. Like if you wanted to run, say, a travel only YouTube channel, you might be able to do some great collaborations with different brands kind of around the world, and you might be able to get some free trips, but it's very difficult to sell any sort of content, I guess, in that niche. I've seen people try to sell like photography photo books for Japan or whatever it might be, and I think that they've very much struggled to generate significant revenue from it. So overall, know that there's no such thing really as passive income, that if it's passive income and it is known about by anyone other than one single human being, there's a pretty good chance it's oversaturated and it's no longer passive income and it requires a lot of work to maintain. I would say YouTube is fun. YouTube creates a lot of interesting life opportunities, which is kind of my number one. I look for things that make me happy and enjoy life, and then also for that unlock interesting and new opportunities. I feel like YouTube does that, but at an ad revenue, passive income standpoint, it's not something that I would personally recommend. All right, Casey says, some questions of mine. How do you make sure you get all the shots you need without making a shoot schedule for the couple? Do you just wing it every time based on the itinerary? I'll answer question number one first, then I'll just highlighting the other stuff. So I've just kind of been doing it long enough. In the beginning, I had a rough shot list that I would kind of break down into sections, and I knew if I had to go back to my car, that on the way from the guys getting ready house to the girls getting ready house, that I would kind of look at the ones that I knew that I needed to get. I would say after like 3 or 4 weddings, you just kind of know. The thing that I still ask my couples for as far as photo lists go is if they have a lot of family, or if they have family that there might be divorces or whatever the dynamics are. I just ask them for a shot list for just specifically the family section of the day, and usually that speeds things up a lot. I also ask to make sure that they kind of give a copy to me and give a copy to somebody who knows who everyone is. It really speeds things up a lot. I tell them that in the first meeting or first phone call or whatever it might be, to make sure that like they know that somebody else should be kind of in charge of this section of the day. This is one because I would rather just focus on just making sure that the photos are good, that once everybody's in place, that everybody looks good. Nobody's like holding their sunglasses or has sunglasses actually on or whatever it might be. If I can focus on that rather than yelling for people and trying to figure out like who's next and who can't run away and can I go to the bathroom, yes or no, I'd rather just have somebody else with that list. If I had an assistant, I would maybe have them do that. I don't think I would steal my second photographer to make them do that, only because I would want my second photographer to be at cocktail hour, usually when we're doing family photos, so that they can actually be getting candids. I feel like that's more valuable than just playing the yell at everyone role. But I would say outside of that, it's kind of whatever happens on the day, that nobody, like obviously you have to get the key shots, but I feel like there are very few real key shots in my opinion, and all couples are different. Like I've had a few couples over the past year that really just didn't want any posed images at all. And I had one couple that was just like, please just don't take photos of like the dress and the shoes and stuff. That's weird. So I just didn't do that part of the day because of that request. So it really does depend on your couples and how relaxed and chill they are. Obviously make sure you get enough coverage to keep them happy, but if they don't want 25 photos of their dress, make sure you kind of know that before going into the day. Part 2 of the question, how often do you find yourself actually using flash on a wedding day? Is it a go-to for every wedding? Is there any situations where flash has saved the day, or any instance where it could have helped you through when you wouldn't have expected it to? So flash for me is very much kind of a last resort. I would say that when I walk into a room, I want, like, if the light is good and there's enough light, and enough light is very, I guess, subjective to whatever camera system you have. I feel like most cameras that have come out in the past 5 years now are really, really fantastic in low light. And if you're shooting primes, I shoot usually an 85 and a 24, or 85 and a 24 or 35 on 2 camera bodies. And if I shoot at 1.4, that is totally fine. Like I've never really found myself in a situation that the room has legitimately been too dark. If it is too dark, that means that they're like, the head table is backlit with candles and there's no light on their face or something like that. And in that case, I'll bring in flash. My strategy for that is to expose for the room and expose for the ambience and do a test frame and make sure that basically like the background and everything is as I want it to be. And then I figure out if I add flash, either an on-camera flash, if I'm a little bit more in control of where I can go, or an off-camera flash if, say, for instance, that if to get a good shot of the podium, if I'd have to stand in the middle of the dance floor that's like surrounded by tables of all people that I'd be blocking their view. In that case, usually I'll set up an off-camera flash just so I don't have to be out there. And then I will typically go with a longer lens in that case, like the 78-200 2.8. And yeah, so it really is my last resort. I expose for the room and then I add flash just to kind of highlight where my subject is. I don't bring in any studio strobes. I know that I haven't seen it in a while, but I know a lot of photographers used to bring in like alien bees and put them in the corner. I feel like that's just like crazy overpowering for the scene. And even using flash at all, I feel like is distracting enough. And that's my personal kind of stance and opinion on it. I'd much happier to just kind of disappear into the wedding day. And if I can shoot with an 85 prime and maybe the images, I have to shoot them at 4000 ISO and there's like a small amount of grain, my clients I've discovered don't really care. Once like things get really, really grainy, obviously they care, but in camera standards now, like I could probably easily shoot at 10,000 ISO and be pretty happy with that. And maybe in that case, I might just add a little bit of noise reduction in post-production. I don't know. I feel like it's just fine to shoot at that ISO now, and just make sure that you're getting it right in camera. Then you don't have to adjust exposures too much. But yeah, I don't love flash. I use a Godox V1 whenever I do need it, and I bring it with me everywhere. I have a backup flash, and I feel like I have 2 more flashes in the car just in case I really find myself in a weird situation, as well as 2, I guess I have like 4 flash stands in my car as well. So I can really handle anything if required, but I find that I rarely use flash unless absolutely needed on the wedding day. All right, last question here. Peter Taylor. Hey, Taylor, what are your thoughts on the book Profit First? I remember you said that a while ago, that you were halfway through it, and you might give some thoughts on how it could apply to wedding photography. So Profit First is basically kind of like inversing the model. I actually posted a video on YouTube a couple of weeks ago about pricing, and that in the beginning, I feel like it's important just to make sure that you can actually book work, and that might come at the cost of maybe not running a sustainable, profitable business in the first couple of years. But then moving into a full-time business and a full-time life, once it actually becomes your thing, that really is like your full-time income, it becomes important to make sure that you are running a profitable business. So I think there are some takeaways. I don't know if it would be my 100% number one audiobook recommendation. I'm gonna look through what I've been listening to recently and tell you if I have any suggestions. And the verdict is, I don't think so. I've listened to things, but I don't know if I would 100% recommend them. I think this week I'm actually I'll make a note of it right now. I'm going to find some good audiobooks, and I'm going to post some things that we can all listen to, maybe together, maybe not in one room together, but at least things that are worth listening to in 2020, like right now, because it's been a minute since I found an audiobook that I really love. If you have found an audiobook that you love, please comment in the Patreon post below and let me know which books to check out, and maybe a note on specifically why it's important, or the kind of the one key takeaway for you. I feel like with audiobooks, if you listen through something and say it's like 7 hours, if you get one awesome thing from it, or one way that it kind of reprograms the way your business operates, and that really makes a significant impact in your business, I feel like it's 100% worth it. I feel like Patreon's kind of the same way, that if you pull maybe 1-2 things a month from here, that it does make it 100% worth it. I find that audiobooks, I'm kind of the same with, that they really do, for the most part, there's kind of one key point, and then they write the entire book to kind of support that point. And once you figure out what it is, you don't have to finish the book if you don't want. That if it's something that feels like, if you're enjoying the process of listening to the book or reading the book, if you're a reader, and you get to the end, or if you get 3/4 of the way through and you're like, I feel like I'm just kind of good with this, I think there's no shame in just not finishing the book if you kind of already got what you wanted from it, or if you've decided that it really just doesn't jive with exactly who you are and what you do. So don't be ashamed to start a bunch of things and get like halfway through them, or even if something just like really doesn't connect with you. I have a lot of audiobooks that I've not made it more than like 40 minutes into, because I just realized that it's better and easier for me to just listen to maybe the author on a podcast talk about the book and to summarize it. I feel like in our content economy that a lot of people write books just to have kind of the stamp and the badge of approval of the fact that they are a published author. And I feel like a lot of those books could be summarized into podcasts, and the authors on podcasts usually do summarize everything pretty cohesively into just the single podcast. So I might recommend that, or at least to listen to a podcast with the author before you dive into the book, if you feel like it might not be 100% applicable to what you do. But I will spend this week, I'm going to reach out to a few friends and ask them books that they would recommend, or books that would help specifically wedding photographers and people in the creative space to listen to or read through if you're into that. All right. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below on Patreon, and I will get to them next week. We'll figure out a schedule for the podcast. I don't know if it'll be weekly because I feel like last time I kind of burnt myself out of it because we were just like constantly doing a Q&A. So I feel like I might go weekly or like every other week or maybe monthly Q&A and then come up with some other shorter podcasts in between. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of Patreon. I'll be back again on Monday with more pricing information for you. We'll get a little bit deeper into actually the mindset and how to actually book more weddings based on your pricing and based on the model that you present, as well as all things that go into your business. That sounds confusing, but I promise it'll make sense. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on Monday.